A warm welcome to all attendees who have joined us on this webinar today. I'm Mirlarsi, the lead product consultant of Serverless 360. I have got Michael Stephenson, a cloud specialist, architect, and our favorite coach here with us today. He has worked consistently with enterprise customers delivering production workloads using Microsoft Azure since it was in preview and has 10 years of experience working with Azure. Michael has been heavily involved in IT community activities with regular event speaking and blogging alongside writing the integration playbook and acting as a host and organizer for Integration Monday. He's an author for Pluralsight as well. Microsoft continues to recognize his community contributions by awarding him a Microsoft Azure MVP award since 2008. Mike has worked with enterprises across business domains and around the globe, helping them achieve operational excellence in supporting their Azure applications. I am as excited as you attendees are to listen to Mike educating us on building a frictionless Azure support workflow today in this webinar. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Ezil. That was it was like getting introduced at the Oscars or something there. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar. I think this is the first time I've presented since Integrate. So been a busy summer. I hope everybody's keeping well. I hope there's lots of really cool integration and Azure stuff going on for everybody. Today, so Ezil asked me to talk a little bit about some of the things that have been happening with Serverless 360, and also what I want to do is kind of relate to a real world project and kind of show a little bit about how we're using this in the real world, how it helps us solve some of the gaps in the Azure capabilities to provide great business solutions. So we're going to go through a little bit of a journey about how serverless can fit into your organization from an operational support perspective. So we're going to go through a few slides. I'm going to have a little bit of a demo that I'll talk through some real world type solution, and we'll just try and lay it all together, and then we'll leave plenty of time at the end for questions. So question number one, or the kind of fundamental base of this presentation, is why is Azure support hard for an organization to do? So we've been doing IT for many years. The cloud makes it so that we can deliver better solutions, we can deliver componentized modular solutions, and we have Azure that has so many different things available. And one of the things I've been talking to some of the people at Serverless 360 about is this idea of kind of reference architectures. So we find a lot of customers have a toolkit that they use to build certain types of solution. So here's what I would view as being a very classical toolkit based on an Azure integration platform. So if your company's building integration solutions at scale on Azure, you'll probably be using these types of features here. So we've got things like logic apps, API management, data factory. And you know, when you think about how many different technologies and skill sets are required to build a solution and support a solution, there's a lot of stuff here. You know, it's very difficult to get somebody who's at a senior level of experience in all of these different technologies, and that's for your most experienced people. But when you think about the support of your IT systems, having people who can have enough experience in all these technologies it either costs you a lot of money or it's a really difficult problem to solve. So this is just the integration area. But if we move on to other types of solutions, so also I've worked with customers building enterprise data platform solutions, and you can see here we've got a customer who would be building a data platform. They've got things like data lake, Synapse, SQL, event hubs, Cosmos. Again, you've got a similar toolkit. Now the great thing is, one of the modular the benefits of the modular approach on Azure is there's a lot of these features which can take part in multiple reference architectures. So if you think about functions, you think about logic apps, data factories, they're quite common to a number of different types of solution. So that's definitely a good thing. But again, you know, we've got quite a lot of technologies that you need to be aware of in how to support. And then if we think about it, you know, just taking a bit of a tangent from my normal comfort zone in the integration space, I actually did some work with a LAMP stack migration from AWS to Azure PaaS. So that was a move from infrastructure to platform as a service, as well as vendor. And again, we've got a number of technologies involved here. So we had things like web apps, we've got Redis, cache, front door, and a whole boatload of things. So again, you've got the same problem. You've got all these different technologies. How do you support this solution at scale? So if we think about, we've looked at 3 different scenarios there. The common challenge across all of them is we've got this this requirement to have a lot of support for a lot of different skills. So I think, those diagrams, there's about 34 skills on the integration platform, 30 on the data platform, and 22 in the web platform. How many experts does your organization have who can cover all of those skills? How many people do you have in each area who are skilled enough to support the day-to-day business running versus the actual development of new solutions? So it's just a really, difficult space to find people who can support your solutions effectively without it having to always fall back on this small group of experts you might have who built the solution in the first place. So if we think of the typical support use case or the path of support most organizations have, we have this idea that we have business super users who would probably get a call from their end users telling them, they need a bit of help with something. If they can't help, they'd escalate it to the level 1 IT support, level 2 IT support, level 3, and that goes through to experienced developers and then experts at the end. And the common things we see is that, typically for a lot of the cloud solutions, level 1 and 2 IT support and business super users have very little visibility of what's going on behind the scenes. They may see a pretty UI at the end of it, but they can't really do a lot due to lack of visibility and a lot of security challenges around the support of a solution. Next up, we have the level 3 support person, and quite often they might not have enough experience to be able to support the solution. So they may have some access and some experience for certain bits, but it's typically that they can't really do a lot. And what I tend to find in many companies is that the support cases tend to always go to the developers or the experts, and very few of these support cases can get dealt with by the by the level 1, 2, and 3 support. And I think that's a big problem for many organizations. The more time that your developers and your experts are spent dealing with day-to-day support activities, the more you're not delivering business value, and the more your total cost of ownership would go up. So, just to throw made up ballpark figures, just to give us a rough idea, maybe, for many organizations, maybe 10% of calls might get handled by level 3 IT support, and maybe 80-90%, something like that, end up going back to the experienced Azure people, and that's a big cost. So the idea is, can we do something about that? And today we're going to talk about 2 modules of Serverless 360. So up on the top here, we've got the left-hand modules, business activity monitoring, and that's targeted at business super users, level 1 and level 2 IT support. And the idea is, can we give them a consumable view of what's happening in their business processes that lets them have a degree of self-service? So if we can let them self-serve, maybe they can deal with some of the day-to-day questions and problems that we might have in the system, and we can start pushing some of that support to the left on this diagram. Next, we've got Serverless 360 business applications, and that's really aimed at the level 1, 2 support people and also level 3 support people. And the idea is that without you having to be an Azure expert, can we group some resources together from Azure in a way that lets them be described as an application, and then we can give them some basic training to support the day-to-day operations of the application, put a degree of automated monitoring in there as well, and hopefully we can let them do a lot more than they can do now without them having to go into the Azure portal, without them having to navigate the maze to find the right resources that they need to troubleshoot a certain problem. And if let's say we can move 50, 60, 70% of the support burden further left, then the idea is that that'll lower the support costs for your organization for the solutions you build on Azure. That's really the use case we're trying to sort of solve or the business problem we're trying to solve. So if we think in serverless 360, there's really 3 modules, and 2 of them we're going to focus on today. So business activity monitoring is about end-to-end tracking of business process transactions happening across your systems. Can we manage and monitor them and have a business-friendly view, regardless of what technology they're built in? Second is business apps. This is about grouping your resources together and creating an operations-focused view, regardless of whether your resources are deployed in multiple Azure subscriptions, multiple different resource groups. You know, whatever your deployment layout is, doesn't really matter that much. The idea is we'll bring the things that work together to solve a problem into a scope, and then we'll make it easier to manage the operations from a day-to-day perspective. They're the 2 for today. The other thing I want to kind of call out is Azure Documenter. So there's another feature that we have, which is about automating the generation of documentation for your Azure solutions. There's also some really great cost comparison stuff in there. So I've been having a little bit of a look at that recently, and I think that's definitely something people should check out if you're trying to work out, how do I analyze and manage my cost in Azure? How do I make sure that I'm spotting increasing trends where my costs are going up, and I can manage to make sure I'm getting good value for money? So that's a feature we'll probably cover in a future webcast. So what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about how serverless 360 relates to a real world story. So I've been doing a lot of work with a customer who's on a massive IT program going on for a couple of years. We have, we've got over 100 interfaces we've developed with Azure integration services. We have in excess of 1,500 logic apps altogether. We also use functions, API management, service bus, event grid, event hub, all sorts of different stuff. I think we're one of the original ICE customers for logic apps as well. The problem is that we've got quite a small integration team compared to the size of the project that we're supporting. So we've got, really this program of work's multiple projects in different areas. We integrate with multiple different applications. So we've got things like CRM, SAP, SharePoint. We've got some of the common systems in the energy trading and kind of oil and energy spaces. So we've got loads of different things going on. Because we've got such a small team really delivering support for, top level support for the solution if it escalates that high, but also delivering new features, new interfaces, etc. For us, the big challenge is we need to keep that support burden manageable. If it gets too big, we're going to be blocked from building new stuff that the business needs, because the support burden for all the existing stuff is so great. So anything we can do to make people in that journey of an escalation for support, anything we can let other people do before it gets to the integration team really helps us out. So things like that, self-service. If you think about things like, we always joke in the integration space, where's my message is the most common support queries. Anything we can do to allow people to self-service that question can save us a significant amount of money. So it's all about maximizing our time to build new stuff and lower the burden of support. So let's think about a real world type interface here. And I want to kind of just paint a picture of what this does, what it looks like, and then we'll follow this one through the journey of using business activity monitoring and business applications. So I've got this invoice processing interface, and up on the top left, we've got this partner who does our invoice outsourcing for us. So they deal with some of the vendor aspects of our invoicing, but we need to integrate invoices into our systems for finance management, for customer self-service and things like that. So we've really got a couple of logic apps that implement this interface. We've got one that on a polling interval goes and checks the vendor's API and says, have we got any invoices there to be processed? If we have, we get a list of them, we transform the data, and we publish a notification to Service Bus to say, look, there's an invoice ready to be processed. We then have a second logic app that triggers, and that one gets the ID of the invoice, goes and grabs the full invoice data set. We then have to do a number of bits of work. So we'll do things like check with SAP to make sure the customer's a valid customer. We'll use some functions to transform the data. We load the invoice into SAP, then we load it into our Dataverse. And once it's in our Dataverse, that opens up the customer self-service portal that we have with Power Apps, and it opens up CRM for managing it behind the scenes. So it's an interface from a demo perspective that's moderately complex, is familiar to people from a real world thing, and hopefully it'll help people see the value of managing this with serverless 360. So first off, we're going to have a look at how business activity monitoring can help us. So if we think back to the support problem, probably one of the most common scenarios we'd come across in this use case would be the business users are saying, have we received invoice number 3 yet? They might escalate to their super user, or they might work together and they say, we don't know, we can't see it in SAP. We've got no idea what's going on. We know from the vendor it's available to be processed, but nobody really knows what's happened. So they have no idea what's going on. So they escalate a support call. Level 1 and 2 support are like, well, we don't know, we can't see anything, we don't have anything to look at. So they escalate it. The level 3 support person might have a bit of access to, maybe they've got a little bit of access to Azure, or they can troubleshoot a little bit of stuff, but quite often they're kind of looking, going, well, we can see, we think there's a problem, but we don't really know what's going on. And often it ends up getting escalated to the development team. They eventually, when you think that's probably at least a few hours, if not a day or so, till that call gets picked up to somebody who can actually do something with it. And they'll, the developer probably looks at the logic app and goes, do you know what, there was an error in SAP, I've reprocessed it, it's worked fine. Feedback goes to the business users, and let's say a day or two later that invoice got processed. So there was a lot of wastage in that whole scenario of people being asked a question they just can't answer because they don't have access, and they don't have the experience to be able to look at the places you could see what's going on. So what I want to do in a little demo here is I'm going to drop into the Azure portal and kind of give you a little bit of a flavor of what this logic app looks like. I'll show my Dataverse as well. So obviously for a demo, I've simulated a couple of bits of the architecture. So for example, SAP, I've just used API management. So in the real world, we have the SAP connectors where we call BAPIs and stuff, but we also have SAP exposes web services on the Fiori stack, so we can call web services through API management. So I've just stubbed them out with that. But what I can show is if I get this browser over here. So over here you can see I've got a list of invoices that I've got in my demo Power App. Just to call out something that's quite cool actually is I use something called Mockaroo, which if you're building any proof of concepts or trying some stuff and you want some real data, I used Mockaroo to be able to get some data that looks like real data, but it's actually just made up from a data set that you give it. So it's a mock API. So I can have this invoice record that got into my Power Platform. You can see it was loaded by my Logic app here. And that kind of just, the demo's really just constantly running, bringing in new invoices. Now, over in my Azure subscription here, what I've really got, I've got this invoice polar Logic app here. And the real work's really the one I want to focus on is this invoice processor. So this is the one when we've got an invoice, it'll get a notification, and you'll be able to see here from the run history. If Azure's going to bring this up. So you can see it's quite a big Logic app, and it's not uncommon to see these kind of things where we've got a bunch of variables, and then we've got get invoice details. So I'm going to call out to an API to get the invoice details from the partner. I'm going to call SAP via API management connector to get the customer. Then I might get my Dataverse credentials from Key Vault, and then I'll start checking, have I got the account in Key Vault? Have I got the account in CRM? And then I'm actually using API management to do some queries of APIM, which I'll maybe blog about at some point because it's quite a cool technique. And then the key bits we've loaded into SAP down here. So you can see I've got my map function. And then we've got the Dataverse connector here saying, you know, how to do an update into CRM to update that invoice. So it's the key thing here I think I want to get across really is that this logic app's a pretty complicated logic app. There's a lot of steps in it. I actually added something at the end as well to put the data into Cosmos as well, because I think I'm going to use this demo to extend it to do a few other things for a future presentation. But the key thing, you know, there's probably best part of 60 or 70 steps in this logic app. So if you come in to troubleshoot this process, you kind of have to know quite a lot about what the logic app's doing to be able to effectively troubleshoot it. So that when we think back to the slides, you know, it would be very difficult to have a level 1 and level 2 support engineer be able to work out what's going on here. You need a lot of experience. So one of the things that we're able to do is over in serverless 360. So if I just grab it over here. So I've got my 2 tabs for serverless. Okay, so business activity monitoring. I've got a few features that I can use to really help me out here. So the first one is you can see I've got a whole bunch of different demos, and I'm going to just mention some of these at the end. But what I'm able to do is create a business process, which is really a folder for a group of transactions that are going to be in a similar area. So I've got my invoice process and business process, and I've got 3 transactions. 2 of them are really simple, and one of them's a lot more complicated. So what I really want to do with my transactions is say, here's something that I want to let the business super user or the level 1 and level 2 support operators have visibility of what's happening in this invoice process. So I've got one transaction's called check for invoices, and you can see it's really just got 1 step in it here. I've got another one called change published. So every time I publish an invoice to Service Bus, I'll just publish a really simple transaction. And then I've got this one at the end, which is the actual processing work. This is where all the real hard work happens. So you can see I've got start, so I've got the logic app, gets the invoice details, gets the customer, the invoice gets loaded, the Dataverse is updated, Cosmos is updated, and you'll be able to see this step through this now. What I want to do, just to give people a flavor of what this is like, is really, if we create a new one, if I just create a demo one here, just to show you how you would do this. So you create a new transaction, you might indicate if there's a direction on it. This is really just metadata for visualization as much as anything, so I'll have that. It might work both ways. And then I get this design surface where I can create my first stage. So let's call it started process. And I'll get a shape that comes onto the screen here, and I can start basically building a visualization. So it's really a bit like an activity diagram. So I'll go, right, the first step's this, I'll then add another step. And then I can start chaining these together and basically build this activity diagram, which will be this friendly view of my process. Now I can also do things like configure properties. So I've got a bunch of global properties I've already set up. So I might say invoice ID, and I might send BAM a message, for example, and I might say, right, well, I've got a JSON message coming in, and there'll be an attribute called invoice ID that contains my invoice ID, or I might pass a metadata header, and I could just have like just have a sort of an invoice ID like that. They're things where I can send BAM some data, and then that becomes a searchable property, which we'll look at in a moment. So if we take a step back a minute, and I'll just cancel that one. I want to show my real process here. So if we have a look at a couple of things. The first one is the properties I've configured. You can see I've promoted things like the logic app ID, the invoice ID. I think I've got the customer ID on here, if I remember right. Yep, so I'm promoting the customer ID, and I'm at the start of processing the invoice, I might not know the customer ID. So later on, when I get the customer, I can push the customer ID and update the in-flight transaction. So we build at design time, we build our friendly view of our end-to-end process. Now, a couple of things to note is that the steps in this process, they're not tied to any one logic app. In the demo I'm showing, I'm kind of mainly using one logic app for it, but I could actually have steps that are in functions and a whole bunch of other technologies we can look at later on. Now, what I do have to do with logic apps is you'll notice back here, I've got this start transaction shape, and it's in my logic app. There's a point where I'm saying, here's the start of a BAM transaction. I can pass a body, I can pass some header metadata, and I basically tell it, this is the name of the process and the transaction to start. And that basically would give me an ID that I can either supply or get back from serverless. And that gives me the ID for my transaction. Now, what we do later on is as we go through the process, we would put checkpoints in. So here, I've decided that actually I've done a whole bunch of work in the logic app, which the business user doesn't really care about, but I reach a milestone where I've now got the invoice data. So I've decided I want to send that to BAM so that the support and the business users know we got that far through the process. And really what you're doing is you create these checkpoints as the transaction executes at the points of interest. And then at the end, when you get right to the end here, I've got one, I think down right at the bottom. So my update Cosmos is the last step, and I might say transactions now complete. And I've also got things like options for error messages and stuff. So having a look over in serverless, if we go to the tracking area, what I'm able to show is that as my logic apps, so if I jump back here for a second, you can see there's a lot of history where I've got this running every hour this runs. It queries and I randomly give it a number of invoices to process. So I get like a variable amount of data processed every hour. But that gives me a lot of stuff in BAM to look at here. So if you're like, say, the level 1 support operator, somebody says, what happened to invoice number 54? You can come into here and you've got a nice friendly view where you can see we've got these process invoice updates, and you can go and you can see down, each one that's published, and I can click on the process update one here. That'll open up the execution of what happened for that transaction, and you can see I've got the individual steps here. And I can say, all right, for this started event, I've got the properties that we promoted. So we've got the invoice ID. I might have chosen to archive a message if I wanted to. So you can see here, I've got a copy of that. You can choose whether or not you want to send a message for somebody to see in BAM. And really this gives me this simplified view of how far through the process I've got, which really is going to help your support operator. So they'll know, if we got all the data from SAP, but the error was actually updating the dataverse, we can maybe then, we can direct the problem to the right people. So I can do a couple of key things from here. So that whole idea of searching, I've got a search bar up here where I can go invoice ID equals, and then if I know an ID, I can just run that and I can search for it and it'll help me find the one that I want. And then the other thing I really want to call out as well is that we've got this action required tab. So one of the big problems is, how do I know that I've dealt with all the support issues for this process? And in here, anything that's been recorded as a transaction failure, I'll show listed in this list here. So what I've actually done is I've set up my demo so that at certain points in the day, I simulate a maintenance mode, so it makes some transactions fail, so I can reprocess them. So we can see here, this one that ran during the night, I got so far, I've flagged up an error. I can click on this and I can see here I've got a nice friendly error message that I've kind of got displayed in BAM. So somebody can troubleshoot that, work out what's going on. If, in my case, if I know it's what I can just resume. So one of the things you can do is you can set up the option for reprocessing. So I can see on this transaction, if we open it up here, there's a couple of different ways you can get to the button, but I've got the option to say reprocess. And I'm going to choose to do it from the started stage, which is where I've set up a reprocessing step. Now, when I set my process up in the BAM designer, that's where I would have configured a reprocessing endpoint on any one of those steps, so you can actually resume it at multiple points if you wanted to. I've got my archived message here, so it's going to push this message in to make it reprocess, and I can just go, yep, go and reprocess that. That's successfully submitted. And then that one should now go away. So let's see if we can just see here. In fact, that's the batch ID. I think I probably need the logic app ID in that view if I modify it, but that'll basically reprocess. That will have dropped off that list, and we'll just resume a bunch of them in a minute. If I get rid of that. So if I now update my search, we should see that one of our processes will be resumed. I'll have to go back. So this is the one from last night. So I've just reprocessed that here. And if we look at that invoice ID, so 1615, we should see that up at the top. So it should be in here somewhere. 1615. Actually, I know why. It's because my logic app only runs every 3 minutes, I think. I'll have to, just in the interest of time, I'll save that. Let's see if I can get the ID here. Just bear with me a second. That's the one we reprocessed. I think I might have done something wrong in the query. Demo gremlins there, but I can basically see that one got reprocessed, and I'll be able to chase it, tracking it through, and see what went on from there. So go back to the top. Should have been just there. That'll be that one there. Look. So there it is. So you can see it went through successfully this time. So that's the like track and monitor section of this. We're basically processing these transactions, managing the day-to-day running of them, but I can do this without having to be an Azure expert is the real key thing here. I don't need to go into the Azure portal. I can do all that day-to-day operations direct from the tracking. Now, the next thing I want to do is, well, what if we have a problem? How do we let people know? So in the monitoring section, I've got some monitoring settings set up so I can configure that I want to have alerts. So here I've got alerts on an exception, and I've configured a Teams channel for that. So if I jump over here, you'll be able to see that I've got it writing out to my BAM alerts in Microsoft Teams every time there's a transaction failure. So you can see them sort of queuing up here when I've simulated those errors. So that's one way you can let people know there's a problem. You can also have it go to a different channel. So you've got things like Pager, and you've got email support and things like that. You can also, you can also set some queries for the query monitor. So I could choose to turn on a monitor that has, if there's a query that flags up a certain number of results. So maybe I want to say if I get more than 10 showing up in this query, send an alert. I can do stuff like that. The final bit for BAM is, so we've got the day-to-day tracking, but actually how is my app or my process performing overall? So here we've got some dashboard capability that we have in a number of places in Serverless 360. And when I create a business process, out of the box, I'll get this dashboard generated, which gives me a highlight view, telling me how many failed, how many passed. I've got a time window, so I can change the time period. So I might go back 7 days instead of 24 hours or whatever. And it gives me how many of each transaction. And that's great to get you started. It tells you a bit about what's going on in your app. But the good thing is I can actually create my own dashboard. So I can choose to add a new dashboard. I can add a widget. And I can choose, if I leave this blank, it'll be the default query, but I can write my own query, or I can choose a saved query if I've saved one. And I can build reports based on a time series. That's basically like a line graph. Multi-time series would have multiple lines. Count is like one of the little tiles with a number on it, and then top chart lets you do a couple of these different types of charts. So I could go, give me a list of all of the transactions grouped by status. I can add that widget, and there's my nice easy widget, and I can basically build up this dashboard with whatever I want. So what I did for invoice processing is, if I go to my dashboard, I just created something that makes sense for this process. So I want to know, right, let's change the time window a second. Let's go back the last 30 days. So I've had 828 successful, 50 failed. I can see how many of each type I've had each day. So I'm simulating some failures every day. I can see the result. But what I can also do that's quite cool is I've got this customer ID property. So I can build a pie chart that says, using the customer ID property, show me how many invoices we've had for each customer and that kind of thing. So you can actually use your own properties if you've promoted them to help you build these dashboards, so you can give something that helps the user know how their process is performing. And I think this is a great way of just opening the black box of this integration solution and letting people see what's going on in a safe and friendly way. So I'm just getting a bit conscious of time, and I think we'll just jump on. And there's a few more things we can talk about from a BAM perspective, but hopefully that gives everybody a good flavour. And really, if we think of the support process I talked about earlier, about where is this invoice number 3, and that got escalated right up to the developer to troubleshoot that. Actually, what we want to get to is this point where the business users have got this conversation. We're not sure if we've received invoice number 3, and they can actually go on self-service, check in serverless 360. They can say, oh yeah, we had it, there was a problem. They can try and reprocess it if you set it up so that they're allowed to do that, and they can actually fix their own issue, and that can get that away from your IT support process completely, potentially in the right scenarios. But certainly as a minimum, it lets them know if there's a problem and answers their question. So that saves you a whole bunch of time. So if you wanted to use BAM, the next question is, where can I use it from? And I'm going to be producing a bunch of blog articles that have been written, and they're going to start getting produced over the next week or so. And it's about how do I use BAM from the common different technologies. So I've showed logic apps today, but you can actually use BAM from a Synapse pipeline, a data factory pipeline, from .NET Code, functions, Power Automate, API management. And actually one of the ones I really like is you can use it from Power Automate. So I think if you're doing an RPA solution, one of the big challenges is that often it's democratized down to people who aren't in your IT team or who are doing really close business engagement, and you've got an RPA running on a virtual agent somewhere. How do you even know what's going on? And you can push data from that to BAM and get visibility of your RPA processes, which is really easy and quite awesome, actually. So if we think back to our project, how did BAM help us? So we recently had a release where we went through a big UAT cycle and released to production. And just a couple of points to note. So we had 30 interfaces that went into our last UAT cycle. And we had the business analysts were able to do end-to-end demos of an integrated solution without the integration team needing to be involved, which I think was a really nice thing to see happening. Because what the business analyst was doing, the show and tell, was able to do something in CRM. It was meant to integrate to another system. They click a button, and then often what would happen is some magic happens behind the scenes, and sometime later they end up with something in the other system. But they can actually use BAM to see that the process was executing, seeing all the things that it was doing, and actually show the business integration. So often the business has no idea what integration really is. It's just this thing that has to happen, but you can actually show it executing in real time to them, which was a really good message. So really what this meant was, for UAT, we had almost zero touch from the perspective of actually having to troubleshoot much stuff. The BAs were doing all of the stuff with the testers. They were able to diagnose what was going on. And really there was very, very few things actually came to the integration team, which was a huge win for us because we're working on the next release. And our support burden went from being significant to very little. That was a big win. And that'll transfer into production as well, because everything that we did in test can just as equally be done in production. So next up, we've got business applications. So if we think back to the support process, so before we were talking about a business transaction, this time we might have a different problem where the business have got this sort of idea that they think the invoice processing system might not be working. Is it broken? They can't really tell because they don't have any visibility. They raise a support call. Level 1 and 2 support, well, they're kind of looking at it going, well, we can't really see anything either, so we've got no choice but to escalate it. Level 3 says, well, I can see that there's a problem, I think, but I'm not really 100% sure, and I don't know what to do about it anyway, so I'll have to escalate it. Developers get this call sometime later, and they go, yep, there's a problem, we'll fix it, and then job done. So that, again, that probably took a few days to all happen. And can we really do something about that to make the less work, make it be resolved quicker? So if we jump into a quick demo again, so exactly the same solution that I've used previously, but this time we're going to look at this other tab, and we're going to look at business applications. So on the top menu for Serverless 360, you can see I've got these 3 choices of which area I want to work in. And when you first log in, you'll see very plainly there's a big widget that says which area do you want to move into. So I'm in business applications here, and I've got a whole bunch of different demos, but today we're going to focus on invoice processing. And so first thing is I build a tree here representing this sort of operations view of the things that I've built of the solutions. So I've got folders, I can group things into different folders, and I've gone down here and I've got this invoice processing folder, which is sitting green because at the minute it's all right from the monitoring I've set up. So what I can do here is I can have multiple business applications under here. If invoice processing is broken down into multiple applications, maybe it's quite a big area and you've got multiple things. So we certainly have that in the real world. But for the demo, I just have this one business app. So at the root level here, you can see I've got a quick view showing me about recent activity. I've got things like what are the resources I've got configured and a few other bits and pieces. Excuse me, I'm just gonna have a quick drink. So when I come in here as a support operator, the first thing that's going to help me is having this view on the tree view showing me if things are green, red, or amber, indicating what kind of problems we've got. So if it's green, I should be in a good place at the minute. Now, what I can do from here, I think one of the most popular features we have is this service map. So I've got a bunch of resources registered with this business application that we look at the moment, and I've set up some monitoring, but I can create in my service map a visualization of what this solution looks like. So actually, if you think back to the diagram I had earlier, this isn't a million miles from what that diagram looked like. I've got some functions that are at the top here that I use in my logic app. I've got my Polar logic app. I've got my service bus topic and subscription. I've got my logic app that does all the hard work, and I've got my Cosmos down here as well. And I can see, these are all highlighted green because the monitoring's telling me that they're in a good place right now. But I could also have one of these areas might be shown red if the monitoring tells me there's a problem there. So the idea of service maps really 2 things. Number 1, show me what the app looks like so I can get some context. Number 2, help me zone in on where the problems might be. So that's a great feature that a lot of people find useful. Now, in my resources here, I can choose to register a resource from Azure with this business app. So I can see here's the list of ones I've currently got, and I can add a one via that, and it just gives me a wizard to go and pick the resources that I want to add. Now, the ones I've chosen to set monitoring up, you can see listed here. You can see what their state is based on my monitoring criteria, and I can choose to look into that, any of these resources. So if we take a look at the Invoice Polar Logic app, it's probably a good one to start with. So you can see, again, it groups it by the type of resource as well, so it makes it really easy to work out what's in your business app. And the first thing I might look at is, well, here's my logic app, and I want to go into full screen mode and get a nice friendly view of what it's doing. And actually, I've got the option to change the time settings here as well. So let's look at the last 7 days. So there's a bit more data. So we go into full screen mode there. You can see things like how many billable executions, the runs, the summary of what's going on, and just some nice visuals that give me a quick, one page, what's this logic app doing all on one page. So I find this dashboard quite useful to just get a view of how it's running, what it's doing, if there's any problems or anything. And after my dashboard, I've then got a bunch of menus across the top here that can help me. So for the monitoring, one of the things we can do is I can choose what counters I'm interested in for monitoring. So I'm going to say, well, tell me if a run failed goes beyond 2 and 5, I think is the criteria I've got. And you can choose the different counters associated with this report, with this resource to integrate into your monitoring and when it would trigger alerts. And you can kind of, there's also a profiles feature, so I can set like a default profile that say all logic apps would pick up. And then I can modify individual ones if I want to vary from that. And you set that up when you add the resource. Next thing is we've got the run history, so I can see and access to all the different runs, and you can open one up and see all the actions that took place, and you can go and drill into them if you want to see what went on. You can also show the retry chain. So the idea here was sometimes you've got multiple logic apps where they're related because one was a retry of another, and if I chose one that had a chain where it had been retried 2 or 3 times, you can actually kind of see them in this diagram, and you can jump to that logic app if you want to. So it helps you troubleshooting some more complicated scenarios, which you can't really do in the Azure portal. Now, what I think is one of the best features for logic apps again, so imagine we've got BAM going, but also if you either weren't using BAM and you were just managing a logic app, or you can use it in tandem, as you've also got the action required feature. Actually, I need to look at the right logic app here. So my invoice processor, this is the one where some have failed. So I have got the option to have an action required tab where it's things that need to be done. So if I wanted to resume this logic app, I could just resume it from here, and that would send it off to get resubmitted and retried, and that would take it off my action required list. So this is almost like a to-do list of what needs done. I can also choose to ignore ones if I wanted to, so I can just give a reason why I'm ignoring it, and that just lets you have a view of what's left to do. Okay, so I think if we take a step back to the business application here, now the next thing is we've got the dashboard. So you saw that on the resource, I had individual resource level metrics, and most of our resources that you've added will have that dashboard where you can have the widgets we give out the box, and you can customize it a bit as well. But we can also have a dashboard for the entire apps. This is a bit like the dashboard in BAM, where you would tend to build this yourself and you would put the things that you care about on this dashboard. So here I've got a couple of widgets on already, and you can see what I decided was from the perspective of the overall view of the application. I might say, well, I want a dashboard that tells me how many times each logic app ran, how many times we've had messages on queues or something like that. And you might basically build a dashboard that brings together certain metrics from more than one resource to create like this single pane of glass that shows you how it's running. And you can basically, you pick the chart type, you pick the resource that you care about, or you can have it cover multiple resources. You pick the metric, and then there's your widget on your dashboard, and that gives you that single pane of glass of how this app performs, which I think a lot of people find very popular as well. And then I think the last feature we'll probably talk about is automated tasks. So I haven't actually got any configured for this app, but what you can do if you wanted to do some things like a resumption. So with logic apps, you can set up resubmit fail logic apps, and you can choose pick a logic app. So my processor. I might say resume failed invoices, and I can configure how I want to resume it. And I can basically build a task that might do something like every night go and resume all of the ones that failed in the last however long period of time. And that's a way that you can automate some of the support tasks that you have to do quite commonly. And again, it can just automate some of the things that cost money to do, take time to do, but are just very repetitive tasks, and can again take some of that support burden away. Okay, so if we jump back to the slides, and we'll lap through and give a little bit of time for questions at the end. So the desired support we got to, so from the problem of it getting escalated right up earlier, now we've got to the point where we can actually spin it round, and instead of it being a reactive process, we can even use the business application can potentially trigger an alert condition, and it can actually go and raise an alert to your support team and say, look, here's a problem. The appropriate operator might go in, they might check the dashboard, use the service map to help them find where the problem is. They can use some of the features on our resources to help take an operator action to fix the problem. We also have another product that people might find useful. So we have a knowledge-based product called Document 360, where a lot of customers use that to actually help build documentation about how to support their solutions. So, if that kind of thing helps you out, you might find that the two can work in tandem. But the idea is that instead of the business going, oh, something's broken, 3 days later somebody looks at what's going on, we can actually get serverless to say, there's a problem, go and fix it. It gets fixed, and then you might just let the business know that a problem got dealt with, and they may never have even knew there was a problem in the first place, which would be a much better experience for your users. So how did business apps help us on that real world project? So the first thing is we get this simplified visibility for our less experienced support team of what's going on. Things like dashboards make it easier for them to work out if things are healthy. Things like the service map help them zone in on problems, and we can just make that available to our support team, so things can be handled before the experts. We've also got some new junior people on the team, so while they're learning some of the more complicated skills, it's a safe way to let the junior people on your team triage issues and see if they can be dealt with. And the idea is just to have more incidents handled without having your very experienced people getting involved. We saw a reduction in support tickets and bugs, which was a good thing. And really, it's just about creating that better customer experience, because they get quicker time to resolution. They get customer self-service, which is great. We have lower total cost of ownership because we get fewer support calls raised, and we spend more of our expensive resources, our developers and our experts focus more on delivering new value and less on supporting what we already have. So just to wrap up, serverless is a great thing to try out for supporting your Azure solutions. It's used by a whole bunch of customers. Free trials are available. Please feel free to go and try it out. Give us feedback of what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to see in the product. We'd love to have you try it out and let us know what you think. We've got a few up and coming webinars coming in. I don't know if Azure, do you maybe want to jump in and say something about the webinars coming up maybe?
Yes, Mike. Mike, first of all, this was a wonderful session. I really enjoyed the real-time examples that you have been giving us and how serverless 360 can pitch in and add value to the frictionless support workflow. So here are some of our upcoming webinars. We are hosting Dan Toomey on our October webinar. He would be talking on building event-driven integration architectures with Azure Event Grid. And our November webinar will have Jan DeVaries. He'll be talking about designing software in Microsoft Azure using serverless technology. We request our attendees to be a part of our upcoming webinars. And now we can go ahead with a Q&A session. We have Mike Stein for a few more minutes with us. With his experience across domains, he would be in a position to answer all of our doubts in the Azure space. So go ahead and post your questions, attendees.
And also, if anybody has questions later, do feel free to ping me on Twitter or LinkedIn or anything as well if anybody thinks of something later. But yeah, if there's any questions, please pop them in. I think we're quite quiet on the questions there, Azul.
Yes, Mike.
We'll just give it a minute or so, and then. So, when does the recording come out for this, Azul? Does it take a couple of days, and then it just goes on the website or something, or?
Yes, for all registered attendees, we'll have the recording shared with them through the email, Mike. It would be generally available in a couple of days.
Cool.
So meanwhile, Mike, let me come up with a question that I feel as useful for our attendees as well. So there are a number of organizations who also consider custom building in logging or tracking solution, isn't it, Mike? So why should they consider business activity monitoring over their custom built solutions?
So I think you cut out a little bit there, Ezel, but I think you were basically just saying custom. Why should people think of serverless versus custom built logging? And I think actually a couple of things on that. So the first thing is,
Custom built.
I think you're cutting out again, Ezel. I'll just jump in with answering what I think you asked. So I think there's a couple of things here. So I think the thing we've got to remember is like the whole telemetry, login, monitoring thing. There's a number of different features, and I think when you're on Azure, you're in this really great space that we have stuff we get with the Azure portal, and we have stuff that's 360 offers, and they actually fit together really nicely, and we're deliberately, the stuff that's happened with serverless is designed to complement what's in Azure. So we've got things like log analytics and app insights that almost every customer in Azure is using anyway. And then we've got BAM on top of that. Now, if anybody who on the call who didn't attend integrate that's where I did that session talking about what are the pros and cons and differences and similarities between log analytics, app insights, and BAM, because actually they kind of do slightly different things, but together they give you like everything you need. And I think with BAM, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to say these are the things, the milestones, the checkpoints that are important to a business user or somebody who isn't a deep expert at that low level. They don't need to know every single trace and debug line. They just want to know what the milestones and the step in the process are. So that's the first key thing. The second one is when it comes to the login thing, regardless of where you log to, that's just one of the problems. The real kind of hard part after that is how do you take that login data and turn it into something useful, easy to consume, and supportable? So even if like one of the customers I work with, we had a custom login solution that was doing some login. Well, the problem you've got is you've now got to manage the storage, you've got to manage the security of your log data, you've got to build ways to make the data accessible. So suddenly you've also got to build a dashboard. You've then got to build the alerting mechanisms off the login data to trigger things to tell people when something of interest happens. And it's all these extra things that turn data in a log to be in something that actually helps you, and that so that's why you have vendors who sort of work in this APM space. And I think the bit that Serverless 360 really focuses on, that's to me maybe a little bit different to the other vendors, is we're more focused on making the data that gets logged, make it be associated to a business transaction. And I think a lot of the times, a lot of the other logins, really that deep telemetry of step by step what went on from like a code perspective rather than a business milestone perspective. And I think that's really where BAM can really help customers as you're telling the business user about something important that happened. And that to me again comes back, that's the difference between BAM and log analytics and app insights. There should be millions and millions more events in log analytics and app insights, because it's deep low level telemetry, whereas BAM's all about business process and business process milestones. And I think what could be easier than just to plug in an API call from part of your component to say, here's something interesting that happened for the business. And everything else from the monitor and the dashboards, the track and trace and all that's taken care of for you.
Agreed, Mike. So BAM proves to be a technology agnostic solution, so you can plug this into any of your business components and get an
Yeah,
whole
totally. Well,
end-to-end
I mean,
view.
if you think of the history of BAM, BAM from Covai, BAM came from BizTalk 360 and BizTalk days, where there was always this need for business activity monitoring, and actually the need for BAM became bigger in the cloud world because we have more solutions that are decomposed across many different resources. So you have functions, logic, apps, and all these things working together. How do you get that end-to-end track and view? That's really difficult. So to me, the use case for BAM's bigger than ever, and I think that's where we kind of have a key strength there is making it easy to use, but also making it really friendly to the business user.
Exactly. So I think we have come to the end of the webinar. Thanks to all attendees for being wonderful listeners for the day. And thank you so much, Mike, for such an insightful session. And let's look forward to have a lot more useful webinars like this in
Brilliant.
future.
Thank you, Azul.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Covey.co